Hey, Happy New Year's, friends, and welcome to Team Jesus Outdoors. Hey, today we're going to talk ice fishing rods. What's the best action ice fishing rod for panfish? What's the best action ice fishing rod for walleye? Or can you find a rod to do both? Today I'm going to be joined by my buddy Nick. Nick builds his own ice fishing rods. And we're going to see if we can't build me an ice fishing rod to do both panfish and walleye. Hey friends, if you're new to Team Jesus Outdoors, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to click that like button. Make sure to stick around this winter. We're going to have a bunch of ice fishing videos this winter. Make sure to stick with us till the end of the video for details on how to win your own custom ice rod.
It's just... Custom rods are a work of art. They're fun to build. I've built 31 rods this season, and I'm just doing them as gifts for friends and family. I mean, Christmas gifts. It's whatever you want to do.
When did you build your first one?
Last year.
No kidding.
Just before ice season, I decided to attempt it, and it was... It's almost kind of like when you were a little kid and you were bored, you would color.
Right.
So this is kind of what I do in my spare time when I have no ice to get on and I don't feel like taking the boat out. I just build a rod. You want a hook keeper on your rod, John?
Yes, I'd love a hook keeper.
Okay. Basically, I'm just gonna...
Just something for the...
Yeah, it was a little loose in the handle, and I like using the surgical tape because the epoxy will actually soak through it.
Yeah.
And it acts like a reinforcement, so
Right.
it turns it into a solid block.
Becomes part of the rod.
Yep. So it's like that was all it needed. I'm going to go right down to where I needed to go. That's nice and tight, but if you look up here, there's a hole. Now, if you're using like custom acrylic handles that are solid and they don't flex, you can buy shims to take up this gap.
Okay.
But on the cork handle, the cork varies so much. You just finding a shim that precise without being able to machine it yourself is the issue that I have. And then I built up this one tape right at the top where the winding check is going to sit because it takes up the room right at the top of the handle. And then something that I do is a little extra security. And with the adhesive epoxy, you don't have to worry about getting air bubbles in your epoxy, but with the thread wrap finish you have to mix it really slow.
Yep.
You can't move too fast because if you get an air bubble they're hard to get out. As if you have an alcohol burner, it's a lot easier to pull the bubbles out of the epoxy, but or with the thread wrap. And the cure that I have that I like to use is a 24-hour cure, and it's a medium build epoxy, so you can build it up a little bit if you want to, if you like the thicker look of the epoxy.
Okay.
It'll give it more of a sheen, and it kind of looks like a small bubble. It looks better to me, but everybody has their own personal preference. But
Have you ever weighed the blank and then weighed it once it's built out to see how much the components add?
the components in the epoxy is generally no more than an ounce or two, and that's if you're using big eyelets. But with these little eyelets, we're probably looking at probably 4 to 5 grams on the eyelets,
Really? That's it?
and then maybe another 4 or 5 grams for the epoxy. It's not very much at all. So,
Okay.
And before I put on the handle, I always get the winding check down about to where I want it. Just get a little bit of epoxy on the stick, and you like to run it down into the hole of the handle. There's a million different ways to do this, but this is just the way that I've always done it. I'll run the epoxy into the handle, let it like run down just a little bit. You don't want it running down all the way, because that way when you push the rod blank into it, it'll push it where it needs to go and fill up any void.
Right. Are you twisting the rod slightly when you
Yes.
push it in there?
I like to rotate it just to evenly coat the handle.
Okay.
And when I first started out rod building, I was making the mistake of using too much epoxy. When you put the rod blank down on a cork handle, you'll see it actually come through the pores on the cork on the bottom here, and then you have a hard spot.
Okay.
So you don't need a whole lot. I mean, we're probably looking at 1/4 of a milliliter total.
Okay.
So a tiny dab of super glue under the winding check, because since this epoxy is going to take a minute to cure,
Right.
I'll just do a little bit under the winding check just to hold it seated while I'm wrapping.
Yep.
And like these eyelets here that come from Sportsman's, they have nice feet on them with tapers on them.
Okay.
And if you look at these tapers where they come down and sit like right on the rod, you'll see it just keels up just a little bit. It's like, I'll sand that back down. That way it sits nice and flush on the rod, and you can get a really nice transition as you're wrapping the thread from the rod to the eyelet. So one of the tricks that I learned from John, and obviously watching dozens of YouTube videos on custom rod building and everything he did. So we got 5 eyelets.
What size tip top are you using?
That's a 1.1 millimeter, and it's a number 6 ring. Now these
Number
are stainless.
6, okay.
These are stainless steel, so you can run braid, mono,
Okay.
and if they freeze up and you go to pick them off, if you got a cracked ceramic eyelet and you go to crack the ice off, sometimes you'll take a chunk of the eyelet.
Right.
So you got a cracked insert. Now the rod's done until you get it repaired.
Right.
With the stainless steel, they're a lot more resilient to ice and freeze up.
That makes sense.
So we got 5 eyelets and a hook keeper, so that takes 7 rubber bands. 1 band for each eyelet, and then I like to do 2 on the that actually. So if you bend it over for just a little bit of resistance, you can see uniformly it looks like the eyelets are going to be nice and spread out. There's not a big flat spot where the rod really kicks down over here.
Right.
It's pretty well uniform, and really you don't, when you fight a fish, your rod's not bending like this. It's more or less bending kind of out a little bit more, so it looks nice and in the steady in the transition. Keeper. Now, what I like to do now is I'll get out a tape measure, just lay it out pretty much as long as the rod is, and just set the rod right on it. Come right up to the tip. It helps me with my spacing
To
because
evenly space your eyelets.
every rod's different, so your spacing will be, if you build on the same blank, it will be ever changing. If I get my tape measure, stay still here. Bring that right up to the 1 mark. Obviously, this is for pulling tight, so I'll look at everything, and I know the rod's going to stop bending at about here. And you want generally 12 inches from the handle, because you don't want your stripper guide too close to the handle. That way when you put a spinning reel on it, are you going to be putting a spinning reel or an inline on this?
Most likely a spinning.
Okay, so when you bring your stripper guide, which is the eyelet that comes closest to the handle to alleviate some of the angle of the line coming off the reel,
Okay.
when you crank over the reel, it'll thump every time it comes around if it's too close.
Right.
Because it's creating too steep of an angle.
Yep.
So you got to try and play with it. Now, I've built a couple of these rod blanks before, so I know generally I'm going to be sitting right at the 10-inch mark.
Okay.
It's 10 to 12 generally, but I'm sitting right at 10, so I'll sit here and start putting on the rubber bands. And these are what I actually use to hold on the eyelets. That way when I get them halfway wrapped, I just cut the rubber band off,
Okay.
and that's it.
Well, that makes more sense than tape.
Tape can leave a residue too, even though painter's tape say it leaves no residue.
Right.
Sometimes you get that fluke, and it does leave residue. So there's the 2 for the hook keeper. And you can buy these small rubber bands. Like if you have any of your kids have ever had braces, don't ever throw away the rubber bands if you want to build your rod, because that's all these are. Now here's the important part of building any ice rod, especially with a carbon blank, because they're less forgiving. So since I have my spacing here, this is done. So this is the most important
crucial thing of building any ice rod, especially on a carbon blank, is finding the spline of the rod.
Okay.
Because if you don't build the rod on the correct spline or one of the splines, when you load the rod over on a fish, you'll notice the eyelets will twist because the rod's twisted.
Follow the spline.
Yeah, you want to find the most natural spline where there's less resistance, and on a carbon rod, it's fairly easy. Fiberglass, the splines aren't as obvious, really. So to find the spline on any rod, just to protect the tip here, you're going to want to put it down on a table and just put a mild load onto it and spin it, and you'll feel it kick over.
Has a natural spot.
Yeah, so like you want to find the path of least resistance, just like anybody would want to. So right here, I can feel a nice little flat spot here.
Okay.
And there's one more, like it kicks over a little bit right there, but it's not obvious. But right here, it really snaps over. Like if you see it turning in my hands.
I can see it. I can see it on the table.
And you can see the way, you'll see when you build it off the spline too, you'll get a flat spot in the rod.
Okay.
So I like to just kick it over and really go both ways with it to make sure you're finding the most relaxed section of the spline. And like right there, if you watch the handle right here, you can see it kick over naturally. And that's really how you want to find the spline. So what I'll do now is
mark it?
I'll line up the rod with the handle completely within my line of sight. Hold it nice and steady, and just one little dot of a pen
on the rod.
With the rod straight. I'll do it right on the cork here.
Okay.
That way you can just take it right off. And it looks pretty good to me. It's got a lot of play on both sides, so that tells me it's right in the middle of the spline. Everything pretty simple. So I'll just start setting the eyelets here and trying to get them straight. Now this one sits pretty flush, so I'm not going to have to sand that one. And I am staggering the eyelets. So we're starting out with a 12 size ring, and then we're going to go to a 10, an 8, 2 6s, and then the 6 tip. These rubber bands are really nice because obviously you see how quick these go on, and you can manipulate them like any way you want. If it's off center, you just come up and twist it. Now this one, I'm noticing there's a bit of a gap. So what I'll do is I'll take this off and look at it, and there's a little bit of paint bubble on the bottom side here. So I'll just do a quick until it's visually gone, and then you'll notice it'll sit better on the rod. And one thing I can't stress enough is when you start to wrap the rod, you got to use, and I like to use alcohol preps just on my fingertips, because as you're spinning the rod, you're going to deposit oils onto the rod, and those oils will affect the epoxy.
Okay.
So you got to make sure everything is nice and clean. You can turn the rod to where the spline mark's completely on the bottom, and if the eyelet's perfectly straight, which 9 times out of 10 they are, you can see, even if you hold it to the side, it goes straight down to the bottom.
It finds its way.
Yeah, so I'll just tap the rod a couple of times, make sure it sits right down. And if that spline mark is right on the bottom, right where it needs to be, and that's sitting right there, I'll put a tiny dab. So just to hold it there, that way when I rotate the rod, it doesn't lose its position. That way I can rotate the rod completely, find all the eyelets, that way they're perfectly aligned with the spline mark and the ring of the tip. And that's generally how I like to do it. So that's what I'll...
Do you use the same epoxy on your tip top as you do on your other ones?
Yeah. Some people are funky. They don't want their tip actually wrapped. But I feel as if, personally for me, when I build a rod, you got a rod that's black, and we're going to be doing green and blue, vibrant colors that are going to stand out. So you're going to have really vibrant colors, and then you get up here and there's a blank spot. So number 4 needs to go left. That was too much. And that's what I like about the rubber bands too, because as long as you don't shake the whole rod, they'll hold the eyelets on it. And the tape, you can't really twist the eyelets.
No, you'd have to take it off and redo it. No, I like that. Makes way more sense than the tape to me.
So I'm going to start out on the first eyelet. I'm going to skip the hook keeper for now because this is a bigger section of thread wrap to see how it's going to line up, because you'll get this green and then put like a lighter blue on it and it'll go really dark green.
Okay.
And I forgot my color swatch at home. So I don't know if you wanted to get a close-up of this, but the starting wrap, there's actually no knot. A friction. It's all it really is. So when you're starting over, you don't want your tension too tight. So it's snug, but it's not tight. So I'll just come back. You go over the rod once, take your tag end, and you do 2 loops around, kind of tight. And then you take your main thread and pull it over the 2 loops. And then a couple of wraps later, it's held. Now you take your burnishing tool and you tighten up your threads where you see a thread gap. I like to get 10 to 15 wraps, but I'm going to practice what I preach here, and before I start touching the rod blank, and since I've touched the epoxy, I'm going to clean up my fingertips a little bit, make sure there's no oils or anything, and just get them clean, and we'll start wrapping this rod. This won't take very long. So, get that done. Okay. I'll do probably 10 wraps. Now, with your wrapper, you have this little slide down here. It controls the angle of your thread, because I'll do these 2 eyelets while this rod's sitting in this exact position, but I'll bring this slide over here and compensate for the angle.
Gotcha.
So you always want a little bit of a back angle pulling into your actual threads that are already
Keep
wrapped.
them tight.
Just to keep them tight, and it'll keep the spacing pretty tight.
Okay.
Now you'll notice when you start wrapping, if you get 10-15 wraps in, that it'll overlay, and that's because you had too much of an angle. So every like 5 or 6 wraps, I'll just alleviate a little bit of the angle.
Okay.
Since I got enough thread on there to hold this tag end, come down very gently with a fresh razor blade and just nip it off.
Okay.
So you're gonna get pretty close. Now, even though I have this slide, I still like to keep one finger open. That way I can help guide the thread onto the foot. So like, and I like to keep them as tight as possible. And once you get up above the transition of the eyelet, you can basically use the slide again just to keep them tight. You don't have to use your finger. You can if you want to take the time to do it. Just like right now I'm above the transition, so I'm just gonna give her a few spins. Now I'm noticing one little gap in my thread, so I'll take your burnishing tool with the flat side. There's a flat side with a concave surface to it, and then you got a rounded side. I'll take the flat side and just put a little bit of pressure and slide it back and forth, and it fills in the gap. It spreads them, take up that little bit of a gap. So I'll just keep wrapping here. Have a gap, so I'll just keep wrapping here. And if you have the right angle, you can pretty much wrap the whole eyelet once you're done with the transition. Now right here I'm coming up to the rubber band, so what I like to do is I'll take the pointed end of my burnishing tool, or my boning tool, sorry, and lift up one band. You can use a needle or a fish hook, just lift up one band and cut it. That way you can come over here and your band is gone. Now you have a clean eyelet to finish wrapping. You just come up. Now, on a rod that's going to be handling heavier fish, I like to double wrap.
It gives it more strength, rigidity. So what I'll do is I'll stop right before the prongs start to come up out of the eyelet and bring it back for one wrap using my finger. Then when you start the second one, create the angle going the other way with the wrapper.
Okay. And you're going to wrap it back in the other direction.
Yep. And you'll notice the color changes of the thread.
Yeah, I see it from here.
It gets more vibrant of a green because the blank's
Yep.
showing through just a little bit.
And with just a single layer wrap, the blank showing.
Mm-hmm.
And on the double layer, there's less blank showing.
Yep. Let's see, I see one little gap, so I'm going to come back and take care of it just like that. Now, I know we're not going to do a full 10-inch decorative wrap on this rod, but I'd still like to add a little bit of a twist to it. So what I'm thinking about doing is what I've been doing a lot of on my rods lately.
You're the artiste, dude. Do what you feel like doing.
Well, I know you want the green and blue, so I'm going to throw in some blue as long as it shows up nice. Now, as you're coming back down the transition of these eyelets, sometimes the thread will roll away from where you want it because you're coming down a slope.
Right.
So I like to keep it, I'll do each individual wrap of the transition with my finger. Like, even though I have the slide here, you notice I'm moving my finger back and forth. It's because I'm putting tension where I want it and I'm letting it loose where I don't want the tension. So like, I'm going to create it back. And I will say this color right here, this green from Pro Wrap, is probably one of my most sought after colors just because it kind of looks like a G Loomis. It's like a G Loomis green is what I describe it as.
It really stands out nice. It's bold.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great looking color.
Now see, I see one gap here. So what I'll do.
If you find that the blue doesn't blend, you could always, the white against that green would stand out pretty good too.
Right. Since before we get into this here, just gonna do a random little test here to see how it stands out. Now it does seem to go a little green, but the blue is still really vibrant. So I don't know if you want to come take a look at this.
I couldn't see from that angle at all.
It still stands out.
Yeah, it does.
So I know exactly what I'm going to do now. Now, if we weren't to do this color twist, it would be a lot faster. It adds like 2 or 3 minutes in eyelets, so it's not horrible by all means.
Gotcha.
So, and I'm just letting this tag end of the blue wrap itself around the rod
I see that.
however it wants.
Okay.
What here's what I do though, because this is leaving a mark on the rod. You know, just let that blue do whatever it wants to do.
Now, I've always found it kind of neat the way that I learned how to stop and start a thread. You don't ever use a knot. Now, there's ways you can use knots and they work, but this is the simplest and the easiest. So I got, from the second wrap to the first wrap, I probably have about 8 wraps left. So I'm going to take a color that really stands out with both of these. So I'm going to take this high-vis orange.
Okay.
And I'm going to make 2 what I call pull threads, which is basically just a couple of 8-inch sections. And then we're done with that orange, unless one of these break, which does happen sometimes. You just take them and you make a loop knot. Make sure the loop's at least a couple inches long. There's one pull thread. Two pull thread. Now what these are used for is finishing your wrap. So you want it to pull the tag end of your thread into the main wrap. So you always want your loop facing the end of your wrap. So I'm going to take this and bring it under the main. Just bring it up into a spot. So there's one pull thread, excuse me.
Okay.
And then I'll take another one, and you want to go on the opposite side of a rod. So just bring it in right there. Now, if you look right here, this top pull thread I have somewhat close to where this blue is coming out of under the second wrap.
Mm-hmm.
That way, when you come down, come right up to the last wrap of that double and come to the very next pull thread. Now, this is where things can get a little hairy sometimes if you're not careful. Release the tension from your spool and you chop this. Give yourself a couple inches to work with. Hold tension on it. Bring up your one pull thread while holding tension on it still. That way you don't slip out from under you and you lose all that headway. Hold tension on this while pulling on the right pull thread. I have pulled on the wrong one before. Just ease it out, wiggling it back and forth. You'll see it come under the thread like a mole digging through the ground. Keep that pull thread. And with this, you want to use a really fresh razor blade or a utility knife, and you want to pull a little bit of tension. That way it hikes it up just a little bit, very gently. That way you don't leave any strands of fiber from the thread, because they will stick up and pull through the epoxy. Okay. So there's, the green wrap is done. Little thing with the blue, getting it on the green, just like that. Keep my own little pile of cut off threads over here, that way they're not all over the place. Then you're just going to respin the rod and get the blue to where it's not all wrapped around the rod. And I'm basically going to do a spiral by hand. So I'm going to come up, make sure you keep this pull thread out of the way. It gets in the way just a little. Come back around. Come right to the very base of the thread and wrap it once around till you come up to the pull thread. And you're just going to take your blue. Now this is a little bit long of a pull thread, or the blue, so I'll pull it tight and pull the pull thread till it's tight to the thread. Then just trim. You know, you don't need to pull 10 inches through, so I'll just trim some off and then work this nice and slow. You see, like right there, I left a little strand. So what I'll do is I'll come back with a tiny pair of scissors and fold it up a little.
Hey, so you know we just hit 1,500 subs.
Yep.
A few weeks ago. Kind of interested in doing something this winter as a thank you for our subscribers.
Right.
How would you feel about building a rod as a giveaway to one of the subscribers?
I'd be totally down to do it. I mean, it's on the internet. Subscribers make the channel or break the channel, and the fact that you hit that goal, it's something that we need to give back to your subscribers, and I think it'd be a great thing to build like a panfish stick, and whoever wins it, they can pick their own colors, length.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'd be down to do it 100%. Since we have this warm up and all the ice is pretty much toast, I think probably should do that sooner than later. That way I can get it built and we can get it to them before first ice, or you never know, maybe your subscribers are somewhere way up north.
So if you're thinking for a giveaway sooner's better, then I should probably announce details in this video. Because if you're thinking we'll give the winner the opportunity to
Pick what they want.
pick what they want, then I'll announce details at the end of this video, and then we can pick a winner within a week or two.
Right. Yeah, I always mix the epoxy till it goes a little bit milky, and then it'll start to go clear again.
I understand that you got to be careful not to get a lot of bubbles in it. Is that right?
Yeah. Like when I pulled it out of the shooter, it had some tiny bubbles in it. So what I'll do is once I'm done mixing it, like it's starting to go clear now, I'll mix it for another minute or two. And this batch has 45 minutes of work time, so I got a big window. So what I'll do is I'll keep going until it's completely clear and I don't see any milkiness, and then mixing stuff. I'll swirl it around in the bottom and try and spread it out as thin as possible. That way the bubbles have time to kind of like just naturally come out. You can take care of some of the bubbles with a lighter or a alcohol burner. And you always make sure you saturate your brush too before you start epoxying it. This requires a really steady hand, so what I'll do is I'll drop the first bubble of epoxy and then work it more and more to the edge of the threads, just little by little, right up against the winding check. So it's pretty much the same process. You just start out. You can see the epoxy is wanting to fall off my brush, so I'm just going to touch that dot to the thread wrap and let it pull off of the brush. Yeah. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and you see what I'm saying, how the blue kind of went a little green?
Yeah.
It's still like a dark teal though, and it stands out really nice.
Stands out way better than it looked like it was going to, looking at the raw thread.
Right.
To be entered to win the 1,500 subscriber giveaway, follow the link in the description below to the Team Jesus Outdoors Facebook page post of this video. Share that post on your Facebook feed to be entered into the video. You must be subscribed and you must share the post on the Team Jesus Outdoors Facebook page between now and January 15th. Immediately following January 15th, we will draw a winner. I will contact the winner via Facebook. I will put you in touch with Nick, and Nick will build the winner his own custom panfish rod. I will contact the winner via Facebook and put you in touch with Nick, and Nick will have a few questions for you to begin working on your custom ice fishing rod. Friends, thanks for watching another episode of Team Jesus Outdoors. God bless, tight lines. We'll see you guys on the ice. To be entered to win the 1,500 subscriber giveaway, follow the link in the description below to the Team Jesus Outdoors Facebook page post of this video.